All right, I think we are good to go. So welcome everyone to today's session organized by Vodafone Africa. This is our sixth installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop, which is awesome. It looks like we are blazing through these workshops. It was just the other day that we had our first one. My name is Charles Kahiro. I am the creative director at RaboWorks Africa, which is a leading provider for consulting services in organizational management, learning, and development. So today's session is a cool one. It will be led jointly by Eric and Francisca. Uh, Eric is the International Science Coordinator at the GoFair International Support and Coordination Office. And we know Francisca well enough. She's a coordinator for Vodafone Africa. And for this session, Francisca will start us off with an overview on how the troubleshooting process for the FDP installations is going. And then we'll have Eric delve into the verification process for the patient data, uh, which is what we will go into once all the FDPs are up and running. As always, let us keep our mics muted to prevent all the background noises from interfering with the flow of the presentation. So if you're yet to do so, just take that some time now to do so. As always, we would like to hear from you. By this, we mean the questions and comments. So if you have any during the presentation, please type them in the chat box and I will bring them up during the presentation. And also just to highlight, we will have a session at the end for questions and answers. So in case you feel you need some extra time, or in case you feel you don't get the chance to ask yours, they will still have a session in the end. And I guess that's it. With that, I hand over to Eric and Francisca.
Great. Thank you very much, Charles, for the introduction. And greetings, everyone. Welcome to Metadata for Machine Workshop number 6. And maybe it's worth mentioning too, we, at the beginning, we allotted ourselves 8 weeks for this Metadata for Machines workshop. And we do this webinar once every week. So we are on number 6 now, meaning that we have 2 more to go as they've been scheduled. But we have, I think, until the end of June to really complete the first phase of this project. And so there's no problem if we find that we need to extend the metadata for machine workshops beyond 8 installments, or maybe this becomes something that's kind of continuous anyways, because metadata is never really done, and we will continue to refine and update our metadata as we go along. So I just wanted to say, this number 8, in terms of 8 metadata for machine workshops, was just somewhat arbitrary. It's because we're all sort of beginners here, including myself. This is only the 4th metadata for machine workshop we've ever delivered, and it is in fact quite different than anything we've done before. So the fact that we're on 6 of 8 is just a nice way for us to keep track of what we're doing, but there's no special significance to the number 6 or to the number 8. And we will continue to assess where we are at each step and see what we can do to keep it moving forward. So that being said, I'd like to dive into the topics for today, and it's really just 2. We will try to give an update on the status of the fair data point technology-related troubleshooting. So this is continuing along. I think there's been quite some nice progress, and I think we're identifying the blocks, and so therefore we can start putting our finger on possible solutions for these things. And as I say, I think this is only going to lead now to better documentation, which is really one of the deliverables on this project, is being able to create really crisp documentation that can allow people to more easily deploy a fair data point on their own. And Francesca will be reporting with, I think, 8 or 10 slides here. And and then I also have a few comments just from my conversations with Case in behind the scenes about what's going on the troubleshooting Slack channel. But once we kind of cover the troubleshooting issues and the status of fair data points, I wanted to give also then a sneak peek at what will be essentially the third and final component of setting up these fair data points. And that's actually going into the hospital or clinical environments and interdicting the information flow there so that we can get patient data into the electronic case report forms. So we won't go into that in detail today, because I think we're still focused on getting these fair data points up and running. But I wanted to give a sneak peek about what that's going to look like. Okay, so just quickly, I wanted to introduce Francesca and her status assessment on the fair data points. But I'm just giving you a quick snapshot. I just took this a few minutes ago from the Fair Data Point Index. And as of right now, I see there's 26 entries here in total. And I know that I think as of yesterday, there were only 23. And I know many of these are African Fair Data Points now calling home. So I think that's a really nice sign of progress. And it's also, I know, an indication of how hard you guys have been working to get these fair data points up and running. But with that, I want to then ask Francesca to take over the controls here.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I'm just going to be doing a brief of a kind of housekeeping and providing a kind of a report of feedback, showcasing where we have been, what we've been able to do, and then what are some of the next steps in the project. I would like to thank you most sincerely for your help in the technical deployment. You, Louise, and Case, you've really been of tremendous help to us. And also to welcome and thank the participants for their patience and participation since the beginning of the webinars. If you just go to the next slide, you see the overview of my presentation. I'm going to be giving an update, just welcome, which I think I already done, and to say thank you to everyone once again for your patience. Even when we have encountered a lot of problems, frustrations, technical hitches, you all have been so patient and taking your time to make sure that all the problems are solved. Then I will also give an update on the country by country update on the fair data points. For this, I will also refer everyone to the scoping exercise sheet that Eric had shared earlier at the beginning of the M4M workshop, and of course the FDP index as well, where you see the list of FDPs on the Modern African projects. Then the month of June, welcome to June. Now the month of June is a very significant one for this project. So I'm going to be talking about the significance of June in the Modern Africa. And finally, there is a cat in the bag, which I'm going to be letting out at the end of my presentation. So yeah, so I'm going to be talking about the country by country updates of the fair data points. If you so move to the next slide, Eric. Yeah, when we started the Modern Africa project, we were looking at having 6 FDPs, one in each of the country partners, the member partners of the Modern Africa projects. And then next thing, Uganda is having a second one, and Ethiopia, there's going to be a second one. And then Nigeria going from, are we going to have one? Now we're expecting to have 3 or more. Zimbabwe, Kenya, 4, and then Tunisia. So as at a few minutes, less than an hour ago, Uganda already has one in a productions deployment. So the first FDP Uganda is in productions deployment. And if you refer to the scoping sheet, you have the URL, and then the FDP index page. You also have the URL home.fairdatapoint.org. You see, you can actually recognize some of these FDPs. And I think Eric also gave a sneak view just in the previous slides. The second one for Uganda is in process. That is for CEST Kampala. The first one is for Kampala International University. And the second one for Uganda is in process. Already the installation is complete on the local machine, and Miriam, the technical coordinator, who is also the TOT support person for Uganda, is working with the team at the CEST Clinic Kampala to make sure that they're able to call home, and we're hoping that before the end of this week that should be done. For Ethiopia, the MVP for Mekele University is actually the first or so, for one of the first from the institution to actually call home, and you can find that on there on the FDP index page. And the second one for Ethiopia from Addis Ababa University is in progress. For Nigeria, the FDP for Nigeria is in progress. I spoke to the country coordinator, Dr. Sakinat, earlier today, and they were working so hard to make sure that it calls home. But they seem to have some errors, which they were working on even few minutes before the start of this webinar, and we're very positive that by the end of today, the FDP should call home. The first one from Nigeria is being generously hosted by the Data Science Nigeria. They are actually paying for the domain and everything. And so we may eventually end up having 4 FDPs in Nigeria. Now we're working towards 3, but with one being hosted by Data Science Nigeria, there's going to be one on the OOU domain, and then one for the hospital in Abuja and another hospital in Ilorin in Nigeria. The FDP for Zimbabwe is in process. I'm so happy to see Kuda Kwashe, and Kuda, I would like to welcome you specially. Kuda was very active at the beginning of this project, but he had some health challenges, and that made him to relax a little, but I'm happy I saw him on the participants list. He had actually told me earlier today that he will be joining us, and I'm happy to welcome Kuda on behalf of everyone and say we're very happy to see you back and active on the Vodan Africa project. For the Kenya team, Dr. Reginald and his team have been working so hard. They've been working so hard. I had a meeting with him today, and they're also in the process of getting the FDPs to call home. So I know they're through with one of the local deployments, actually 3 local deployments. So we can conclude that they're in process, and I'm very confident that before the end of this week, at least 2 FDPs from Kenya should be up and running and listed on the FDP index page as having called home. The same for the FDP number 6 for Tunisia. I had just seen that initially it was hosted on one server, but I can see now that it's being hosted on the university, on a subdomain on the university server. So it's so exciting that the FDPs were actually making progress. The summary of status can be seen. Eric, if you go to the next slide. So we have provided, sorry, this is a little not so clear, but if you follow the link to the scoping exercise, you see the summary for the different countries. For Uganda, we have the 2 FDPs, and you see the progress. And I'm going to be, as soon as we have the final URL or the domain for the FDPs, I should be able to update them in the scoping sheet. I've been able to do that of Uganda because it is final. And one of the questions we've been trying to get from Case and Louise is to help us determine what are the minimum requirements. I have shared what we did for KIU, the server size, the RAM size, and every other thing. So if we're able to get that and share that with other members of the team, I'm sure we'll be able to get the correct and final URL for where the FDPs for each of the FDPs in the different FDPs in the country will be deployed. Okay, I've just seen an update from Dr. Wondimu Ayele that the AAU FDP has been deployed locally. That's actually great news, and congratulations to you and your team. The next slide, Eric. Okay, thank you. So while we're trying to resolve the question of ownership, one thing that has come to mind is where would actually the FDPs reside? Because it is a partnership project between Vodan Africa, universities, and hospitals. And to further formalize this process, we really would love that the FDPs are hosted on the domain of the partner hospital or university. Now, in the case of KIU, we created a subdomain for the FDP, that is fdp.kiu.ac.ug, and we've seen that of Mekele University and the one of the University de Sus. So for Westland, for the hospital in Kamukunji, Case Kampala, and every other one, we really would love to. And if the size of the main domain of these universities or hospitals are not large enough, I think the administration of Northern Africa will be able to make some financial contribution towards buying additional space or storage for this web domain so that they're formal. We don't just want them to be hanging on some .com or .info or whatever domains, but let the universities or hospitals or clinics own the FDPs so that they form part of the domain. I've also requested for the domain server requirement, the minimum requirement, so that when we're planning towards these deployments, we'll be able to at least have the minimum requirements and make some projection in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years. How will this data grow? And then how do we need to increase the server size and so on? But those are things that we'll formalize with the different country FDP units as we move along. So we look at the month of June in the next slide.
And so Francesca, may I also just mention that there's a parallel effort, of course, in the Netherlands to launch also vote on fair data points. And so what I can try and do, being based here as well, is to relay the decisions made here about how you structure the naming and the ownership of the fair data points. I can transfer that to the groups here in the Netherlands, and maybe we get a consistent agreement on how the naming should look. What we can result then is not only internally consistent fair data points throughout Africa, but then also connecting to the Netherlands as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. I'll follow up with that. I'll follow up with you. So the month of June is here, and it's a very significant month for us in this project because by the end of June, we're completing the first half of the Northern Africa project. Remember, this is the initial implementation is for 6 months, which is from April to September. So we're completing the first half. So we're looking at, okay, the project should have been 50% completed, but at the rate at which we're going, we have actually moved past that. But it's very important that we realize this. And also looking at the timetable shared by Eric at the beginning of the metadata for machine workshops. We expected to conclude the training of trainers in June, though he had mentioned earlier that it's going to be a continuous process. But when I was making this slide, I was actually referring to the first slide and the schedule he shared with us then. So June is also significant because we expect that, okay, we're concluding the TOT. And I'm happy to note that we have built a lot of capacities within Africa. Like I know 2 of the data stewards, Obina and Nambobi, they have been working with the other teams in other countries with the FDP deployment. They have been assisting in the troubleshooting. So if you look at where we started from in April, everybody was practically confused. People had no idea and all that. I remember then some of the questions I was hearing were like, okay, what are we going to do with all this knowledge? You know, most of the terms were just like technical terms, but then the application to practice didn't really resonate with people. But now we have members of that ground zero now up there helping with deployment, helping with productions deployment, helping with local installation, helping in troubleshooting, and then checking out systems requirements. So it's actually a very, very significant milestone for us that we should be very happy. And then of course, this June is going to determine the next step in this project via the proof of concept, because now we need to prove to our sponsors in order to continue to enjoy their support and then sponsorship that yes, this project is technically feasible in Africa. So it is expected that by the end of June, all the FDPs would have been completed, installed, into production deployment and working, and then we can now go back to our sponsor and say, okay, yes, technically this is feasible. The African team can actually do this. They have actually done it. And then these are the results. So the month is very, very significant. And I want all of us to continue with the hard work and the rigor with which we started. I know these are extraordinary times. Countries are partially or fully locked down. Some of the data stewards are graduate students whose studies have been suspended, but now see this as an opportunity to learn something new. I would like to give the example of KIU. Yes, we had a data stewardship system in place, but it was kind of different now from the fair point of view, because now we have been able to revamp and then to enhance our data stewardship process. And now the data stewards are not just sitting behind computers and entering data or entering people's details, but they have actually learned some new and exciting research ideas. And many of them are already even thinking beyond the border in Africa, what can I do in my higher degrees from this project? So it's actually a very, very significant one. And if you go to the next slide, Eric. So I said there was a cat in the bag. Last week, there was a proposal to establish the Vodan Africa Foundation. We have been working with our partners, they have been providing support, but now for the project to be independent, and of course, some of our European partners to kind of help them when there are issues of conflict of interest, so that we continue to enjoy their support and we're not restricted from some applications or from some grants that we can apply for. And of course, based on the fact that we have demonstrated that Africa can actually build capacity and continue to sustain it. So the case was presented, the proposal was presented to the Senate of the Kampala International University, who is leading the Vodan Africa project, to establish the Vodan Africa Foundation with offices in the headquarters in Africa, Kampala, and then an office in Belgium. And then we continue the membership with our current partners, the 6 countries, Nigeria, Uganda, Tunisia, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. We still maintain that partnership. And then we also have our European partners, GoFair represented by Mima, and then IPA represented by Simon Stoker, still part of the partnership representing the European side. And the proposal was approved by the Senate of Kampala International University. So I'm happy to announce that we now have a Vodan Africa Foundation being operationalized, with the special thanks to Professor Miriam, who actually pushed this, and for Eric, who gave us the technical backbone to say, okay, Africa, technically we can at least stand to a certain degree, supported by our European partners, and we can actually go on and implement the data stewardship competency centers for Africa. If you look at the list, you see that the European countries have actually advanced in that regard. But now that we have a very strong, I would say, data stewardship system from this Vodan Africa project, I see that we're actually ripe, and that has been demonstrated, and we have enjoyed that confidence from the Senate of Kampala International University to grant the approval to implement the Vodan African Foundation. So that is it from me. I would like to thank everyone again while I hand over to Eric to continue with the rest of the technical discussions.
Super. Thank you very much, Francesca. And yeah, this was really exciting news when I heard it last week. And, you know, congratulations to everybody. I think, you know, very rapidly here, I see 30 people on here on the call. I think the 25 or 30 people here who might call themselves data stewards, you know, very rapidly are becoming the world leaders in fair data stewardship, and it's all happening in Africa. So yeah, I think everyone should be really proud, because it's, yeah, as you say, Francesca, these are extraordinary times. Nothing is really easy right now, but everyone is really making great progress. So congratulations.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. And just a few more comments concerning the deployment of the FAIR data points. There's certainly clearly identified blocks now, but that's also the first step in overcoming them. And I think Francesca's given a lot of evidence here that, in fact, the progress is really being made. And yeah, we have the, at least that I know from the last day, that there's now 3 or 4 more FAIR data points than there were yesterday. So it's really nice to see. And what in talking with Case over the weekend, we think there's maybe kind of like 2 levels of improvement that is possible here in figuring out how to make these FAIR data points more easy to deploy. And the first one is really centered on the development team here in the Netherlands. I think we've been developing a lot on the Linux Ubuntu environment, but everyone, or not everyone, many of you in Africa have been using a Windows environment and at least maybe trying to get your feet wet on a local laptop environment. So what we might be able to do is to work out a deployment instruction based on the Windows platform and maybe local environments. And maybe that would be an additional way to get people started and to see more positive feedback right away. The other thing is that the call home function, which is actually quite new to the FAIR data point itself, is at the moment, it's giving, of course, pretty minimal information. It's just a minimal function. And certainly when you reach production mode, the FAIR data point can ping home, can give a signal to the home base if there's an internet connection. But that's different than the FAIR data point actually being accessible and queryable. And so it's in the works now that the development team will try to elaborate on the indexing here, that it's not just a call home function, but it's kind of a status check on the FAIR data point. And I think that can maybe help resolve a lot of confusion that we've had. And then flipping over to the data steward side, Case was identifying that there are some basic IT and server skills that can probably be profitably tuned up. And if we can maybe get a better fix or a more explicit understanding of that, then it should be also possible to create some, or either to create or probably better to link to existing resources that can beef up the skill or the knowledge on just some basic internet, web service, and server application skills. Case is, as of today, I know, making an install video, and this is for the Linux Ubuntu environment that he's got. But I think it incorporates a lot of the issues that were confronted over the last week or week and a half on the installation. So because I didn't get that link today at 2 o'clock, I think Case is still working on it, but he wanted to have it done by the end of today anyways. So we'll make that available to you. And then also, Case wanted to mention that Charles and Mariam seem to have been pretty effective in getting their FAIR data points up and troubleshooted. So it may be that we begin to look towards Charles or Mariam, or maybe some others of you who are learning very quickly how to install these FAIR data points, that you may be consulted by others in the project for your background and skill in troubleshooting FAIR data points, say in other countries or in other regional hospitals and that sort of thing. And then also, Francesca mentioned Reginald as well. Just over WhatsApp today, we had a nice conversation, and Reginald is already kind of boiling down the instruction process. What I saw last was a very nice abbreviated 10-point summary the instruction process, but maybe we go through a couple of iterations on that, and then that becomes a handy cheat sheet as well, just to help people get the overview and get up to speed quicker. So that's kind of just a summary of what we've seen over the last week.
Yeah, excuse me, Eric, if I
Yeah.
may speak last point. Yes. Yeah, I discussed that with Reginald, and I know Nambobi also had put together a document on FDP installation for macOS users. So I guess I'll share that with you and Reginald so that you can also incorporate that, since we're looking at Windows, Linux, Ubuntu, and then for macOS users as well.
Super. And this is exactly what I think is going to be so nice about this project is, in fact, the delivery of the training materials at the end of this, I think is in a very large part going to be contributed from the data stewards here who are confronting these problems on your own, and you and no one else is better suited to, I think, design the instruction materials going forward. So yeah, thanks to Reginald and everyone who's sharing their knowledge here and trying to figure out how we can get these things up and running as soon as possible. Wonderful. And what we can do is we can figure out, just maybe on the Vote on Africa repositories page, there's a handy place there, or on an OSF page or something, but we'll figure out a very useful repository for the documentation that we create, and that can serve as a basis for even a kind of more professional instruction material following all this. Okay. Last week, I ended with this slide, and it was just a reminder to all of us that, once we get the FAIR data point up and running, once we get the FAIR data point profiled according to an organization and as part of the Vote on Africa project, there will be one more step to complete in this process, and that will be actually going inside the data collection environment in the hospital, in the clinic, and figuring out how we can interdict the information flow in terms of like the patient records and the diagnoses and the procedures performed by doctors and nurses. How can we get some of that information as required into the electronic case report forms? And we could call that a kind of verification process. I think it will be unique to each environment because each hospital and organization will have its own internal processes for record keeping and for data acquisition. So there will be customized processes that we have to implement to verify the data into the electronic CRF. And of course, the case report form that we're using is repurposed from the WHO. And I'm just showing the top of the page from the WHO case report form documents. There's actually 3 modules, or kind of 3 subforms in this WHO system. And I think the first one is really just kind of like the admissions form. The second one is what they call like the daily form. And so this might be like daily updates on the patient if they are available. And then the third is the discharge form, or sadly, maybe the death form as well. But in any case, there's these 3 modules, and the technical guys here in the Netherlands, Luis and some others on the team, have taken this form, which is really just like a PDF. It's a, I think, I forget how many questions there were, but it's not a very lengthy form. And it contains a lot of very traditional patient medical record data. There's very little data that's incorporated to identify the patient, which is nice. So the CRFs are themselves quite benign, although they are still considered patient record data and should be treated as such. But there's not a lot of information here that could be used to identify patients. But anyways, the team of Luis have rendered that form into a machine actionable format called RDF. And that document, that RDF encoding of the form, is available at BioPortal under this WHO COVID-19 data model, semantic data model. And if you were to scroll down the page, you would see links to different ways of looking at this code. And here is just a snapshot of what it looks like in the RDF code. And I just have a link here as well to RDF to remind you what this markup language looks like. And this is just a random snapshot inside the case report form. And they're asking here for, let me see, in this case, something about hemorrhaging and other records that I don't see the human readable. Yeah, so this is really about hemorrhaging. And what you see here are encoded, are links to ontological terminology. So very well precisely defined biomedical terminology, all of which has unique identifiers attached to it. And those unique identifiers are found here now embedded in the RDF code. And this is allowing the data in the WHO form to now be machine actionable. In other words, a computer can scan through this code and can identify, for example, hemorrhaging and bleeding issues in this particular patient. And because of the precise terminology, the computer can then be able to interpret this and offer it up to human users in a very efficient way. So this work has been done. This was one of the first things we did in the Vote On project. But now if we come back to this verification process, another way of saying it, and I'm showing this now in the little blue arrow below the hospital, is that the local system of record keeping eventually needs to be translated into this RDF format. And one way of doing that would be to have someone who's skilled and trained in RDF and in biomedical ontologies to actually write the patient information by hand into that RDF text, completing the form essentially so that the computer can read it. And not only does that sound laborious and difficult, but very few of us in this world, and I definitely include myself in that category, very few of us are so competently skilled at RDF that we're willing and able to take on that project. Another way of showing it more visually is to say, yeah, we have some system of record keeping, and it could even be paper and pencil, but we got to get that data into the electronic CRF. So we need to think a little bit more deeply about how to do this. The developers of the FAIR data point have worked or are now working with a number of different organizations that can make this process a lot easier for us. And I'm showing two of them here, and the URLs that can get you to these organizations. The first one here is the Data Stewardship Wizard. And this is a group based in the Czech Republic that has a very nice platform that allows people to create basically a web form, but the information that's entered into the web form can automatically be captured and then represented in an RDF semantic data model. And so there is now an effort at the Data Stewardship Wizard to craft forms that will enable, for example, a data steward located at the hospital to enter the data from whatever format, even pencil and paper, but then to enter it into basically a web form, and the output will be the electronic case report form that we can link to from the FAIR data point. So this is a project that's in development. It's not ready yet, but it's in the time frame is something like into July. It may come earlier, but I think the real due date is at the end of July. So if we start considering this process earlier than that, the Data Stewardship Wizard may or may not be available. On the other hand, there's another platform called CEDAR, and CEDAR is a acronym for the Center for Extended Data Annotation and Retrieval. CEDAR is also a very nice acronym because it refers to cedar trees, which are endemic to the region of Stanford University in Stanford, California, or in California, where so the tree's endemic there. It's everyone loves these beautiful trees. They smell really nice. So the acronym is sort of reflecting the fact that this group is based at Stanford. CEDAR is a project. It was funded by the US government, and it is very similar to the Data Stewardship Wizard, but much more focused on metadata specifically. And so there are some very nice functionalities for CEDAR that really give a lot of power to data stewards who can create reusable templates that are machine actionable, that capture metadata as we like. But then those templates are really can also be made reusable. And so others can come, investigate those templates and reuse them. And by the way, I showed, I'm just gonna go back to another slide. I showed BioPortal here, which is a home for this semantic data model that was created. BioPortal is connected and was built in conjunction with the CEDAR metadata platform. And this is kind of the secret behind CEDAR, is that by plugging into BioPortal, which has, I think, 700 biomedical ontologies in there, it's pretty amazing that you can create forms that can capture data or metadata in a machine actionable manner in a pretty straightforward way. And so now I'm coming to the last slide here. At the CEDAR website, there's an opportunity to watch a video, and there's, I think, an entire YouTube channel devoted to CEDAR as an overview, but then also some instruction on how CEDAR works. And I'm linking you here to the video. Here's a 2-minute or 2.5-minute video that might be worth watching between now and next week, just to start getting ready for the fact that we're gonna have to address this verification process. And I'm anticipating that depending on how the FAIR data point installation goes, that if we are in fact ready to start the verification at the hospitals sooner rather than later, that we may opt to use the CEDAR platform first until the Data Stewardship Wizard platform comes online. But in any case, you can get familiar with how the system works, and I think it helps to fill out maybe some of the last components here that we need to consider for the verification process. So that's maybe some homework for next week, and we will continue to track the progress on the FAIR data points and continue to troubleshoot as needed. And I will end it there. And we still have another 13 minutes or something here, so I'm happy to take questions if people are interested in having a conversation now.
Thank you, Eric. Just a reminder to all in attendance, if you have any questions or you'd like something clarified, just type in your questions into the chat box and we will address them now. Just to start off, there was a question in the chat box there was a request by Professor Miriam, if you can explain how it is ensured that the electronic case report form, while in machine readable format, is depersonalized. So essentially, how is sensitive patient data or information protected?
Yeah, and good question. If I go back to the to an image of the fair data point architecture here, there's multiple ways to do this, and in a way, this is something that can be given to, or is of the discretion of the fair data point owner. The idea here, I think, in Vodon, and sort of our thinking at the moment, has been that the electronic case report form is stored and is served, is made available on servers located within the hospital or the clinic where the data was captured, or maybe by a proxy such as a university that has been given the authority to store these things. So that's one thing. And it may be, and I suspect we probably go down this route, that those electronic case report forms, with whatever data they may have, sensitive data or not, but those case report forms, those individual RDF files, are not in themselves publicly available. So there's no way to get to them without some explicit authorization and authentication procedure built into that, or some other accessibility protocol. However, the metadata that point to these case report forms are already crafted in such a way that they do not contain any of the sensitive patient identification information. So the metadata, therefore, could be rendered completely and freely, openly available for queries on the fair data point. And so algorithms can come, organizations, people can query the metadata without running the risk of exposing any patient sensitive information. If there is a special interest after that initial query that we would like to see indeed the details of a patient case report form, then initiates a process of request, authentication, authorization to actually get access to that data following the governance and regulations of that local institution. So I think that's the way we've seen this. You can imagine some sensitive patient information is, for whatever reason, may be exposed at the metadata level. But if so, then of course all the proper safeguards have to go in to how that data is handled. So there will be, I think, at some point, an assessment made certainly within the local hospital or research organization, but then maybe again at the level of the Vodon project as to what the status is of the protection on patient sensitivity data, and are the local laws and rules being followed in each case. So that's homework for us to do. It's part of this verification process. It's part of the fair data point installation. And I hope, Miriam, that answers your question.
That was brilliant, Eric. Thanks a lot. And maybe since now I'm talking anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for Kudakwashi for joining us. has taken a little while because of different circumstances. But maybe at the end, Charles, there might be a little moment for Kudakwashi to say hello to all of us since he is new here. Thanks again.
By all means, you can do so even now. I believe Francisca also wanted to say something.
Yes, I actually wanted to call Kuda Kwashe, just like Professor Miriam had done, to at least say something to us. Like I said at the beginning of my presentation, he started with us and he was quite active, but due to certain circumstances, he hadn't been. But now that he has joined us in full, it would just be nice to hear one or two things from him. Kuda, please. I know he sometimes has network challenges, but he still seems to be with us.
He is saying in the app, thank you very much. So I think we have recognized Kuda. Then we can continue, Charles, with the questions. Thank you, Professor Francesca.
All right. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, just type them in the chat box and then we can address them. There's also one on, is there any platform to learn IT or server skills?
And so that's a good question in that I know the answer must be absolutely yes. I'm guessing that there's a lot of nice materials out there. I don't know off the top of my head links to these things, but either in, from academic institutions that have made curricula available, or just kind of straight up YouTube videos that may be helpful. What I think could be quite useful going forward as maybe kind of a sub-project in the Vote on Africa is maybe a subgroup would be willing to kind of do an investigation or a survey of resources out there. And I can certainly help with this. I can contact people that I know that might be aware of these things, but maybe we can put together already a short list of particularly useful links to some of these basic IT and server skills, training modules that, once we know them, we can have them available to us. If language is a problem, we might even be able to find them in different languages. And I think that's a great sub-project. We can also, I think, from that exercise, we can begin to sort of identify as well, maybe a list of prerequisite skills that are handy to have before you attempt to set up a fair data point. And what I can imagine then is, even before we launch into, or in the future, before we ask people to deploy a fair data point, that maybe there's even some kind of checklist of some basic skills that are handy to have in place. If we can enumerate that list, that's really helpful and handy. People can check it. If there's a gap in their knowledge, then they can reach out to some of these resources that we can identify and kind of get up to speed on some of those basic things. And that might make the deployment process a lot easier then. So like I say, I think the experience here is turning out to be pretty valuable because we can translate it all into our training materials. So maybe I can talk with Francesca, with Miriam. Maybe we can find a way to get a subgroup organized for these basic IT skills.
Absolutely. Yep. Sure.
And there are some resources already publicly available. Windows does have its own server training if you're delving into the Windows Server platform. The Linux Foundation does offer free courses when it comes to all these introduction to Linux, Kubernetes, all these open source networking technologies as well. And there are some, although not free, but fairly priced on the udemy.com site, where you can get all these introduction to server administration courses that help you learn how to deploy and manage your servers. Essentially, it's a basic course for server administration. I think it's around $12 or $15 that can give you enough basics. However, YouTube is always there. And there are specific resources on YouTube or channels that do avail these information for free. Just need to take some time and check for it, more or less. I don't think we have any more questions in the chat box. I believe that's it. So unless there's anyone who has final comments or final pointers, maybe Francisca, Eric, Professor Miriam, before we close.
I'll just call on, say thank you to everyone and call on Professor Miriam if she has some opening or some closing remarks to give. Otherwise, that's all from my side. Just say thank you to Eric and thanks to everyone.
Yes, the same here. Thank you to everyone. And thank you very much, Francesca, for giving us the overview today. And that's it from me.
And from me also, thanks to Eric and Francesca, was very clear. Charles, thanks for moderating. And this week we'll be submitting the program that will allow us to continue after September. So all going well, and we'll catch up again next week. Thanks a lot to everybody for being here, and have a really great week. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We really do appreciate that you took the time to be with us here today. Some announcements before we sign off. As always, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on the Vodafone Africa website. So in case you missed part of it or you'd like to review a section of it, just be sure to check that one out. And also join us next week for the 7th installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop on Tuesday. Details on the timings will be shared on the Vodafone Africa comms channels. That's the Slack group and the WhatsApp group as well. So thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye. Bye.
That was nice.